I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us once again, one of our favorites, one of the smartest people in finance, period, the end, male or female, because she happens to be a female, Catherine Austin Fitts, coming to us from Tennessee. Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Greg, always a pleasure.
You're out with a new report, and your reports are very long, which is not a cut against you, very complicated. I just can't get to it all on this. So we're going to add some research notes here. We're going to get to some of the high spots, but no way it's really just kind of glossing over the surface in this interview. So people are just going to have to come and join your solarareport.com and get the report if they want the in-depth version, which there's a lot to it. There's a lot I'm going to leave out, not on purpose, but for brevity. We have no relationship. Just want to tell that on the front side. No economic, no financial relationship. So I don't get paid on telling people to do this. I just think you're good, and I think you have good stuff to say. That's why I have you on. Anyway, let's start with your report title.
I can make more bets with you, and you won't take them.
No, because that's like me. Once I get knocked out by Mike Tyson, thinking that I can knock him out, do you think I'm going to step into the ring again? Going, let's try it again. Yeah, no. You won the bet that $1 was going to go up, and I said, oh, no, it won't go past 80. Well, I sent you $1. Anyway, the long and short of it is your most recent report, which I think is frightening, and you're not a person that comes out with frightening titles. You just called it Planet Debt. And one of the things I want to start with is the debt doubled from 2007 to 2014. There are 39 countries with a higher debt to GDP ratio, which when you go past 100%, bad things happen. 39 have more than 100%. USA has 230%. Of course, we can print tons of money. Planet debt, just the overarching deal, last time you were on, you're like, we may have a crash, about a 40% chance of a crash. In 2014, you called it a 2% chance. You seems to me you're worried about the massive debt levels on the planet.
Yes, I am worried about them. I still think the chance of a major crash or collapse this year is relatively small. But as I said when we talked last, I am very worried about the level of violence going up to deal with the tensions resulting from this. If you look at the debt, Greg, there's several things to point out. One, the debt is very high, but it is bifurcated between people who are borrowing in a currency they can print and people who are borrowing in a currency they can't print. And that's of great concern to us because with the global slowdown, a lot of people have borrowed in dollars and now they've got to pay it back. At the same time, they've got to earn dollars in an economy where it's tougher to do. So that's issue number one. The second thing is you have really divided into two classes of people who are being entrapped and people who are doing the entrapping. And that relates to what I just said about the dollar and where the dollar could stand. My concern when I finished the report, I thought, I'm almost tempted instead of calling this Planet Debt to call it Planet Entrapment. So coming into the bailouts, we saw two things happen. One is we took all the debt that was sitting on the banks, or much of the debt that was sitting on the G7 banks' balance sheet, and shifted over into the sovereign governments. And then the second thing we did was we lent tremendous amounts of money to the developing world, which wasn't that leveraged coming into the bailouts. And the leveraging of the developed worlds, or the developing worlds, is one of the reasons for the growth in the economy since 2007. And now that they're fully levered up, the question is, where do we go from here? And it's why you see all sorts of leaders around the globe talking about, what's the end game here? What's the exit plan?
And I want to get to this early on because it's one of these data points that is grounded in today's reality, and it plays nicely with your Planet Debt report. And Bill Gross, Mr. Bond King, he was at PIMCO for the longest time. Now he's at Janus, and he says that just to your point, how does this end? How do we get any more debt? We've reached, in effect, I'm paraphrasing, peak debt. But what he said was, this is not a paraphrase, that he's not worried about a Lehman type crash. He's worried about a crush of perpetual bull market enthusiasm, and he thinks this is going to end, that this is all going to end. And it seems to me that he's not talking about 5 years down the road if he's talking about it now. What do you make of his comments?
Well, I think the bull market in bonds is going to end. So he rode the bull market in bonds with interest rates dropping from the 80s on. So I think that's topping one way or another. Where it goes from here, who knows? It could plateau, it could fall. But the reality is that is over. And so now that's why in the first quarter, in the last time we talked, I talked about Planet Equity, because right now, so much of the bond market is more than double the equity market. So much of the money is looking for a place to go. And it can go to cash, or it can go to commodities, or it can go to equities. And so there's a topping in the bond market, and that's the big question. Where's the money going to go? And when you and I talked about the possibility of a crash up in the equity markets, that's not so much people think equities are great. That's money trying to get out of the bond market.
So when you talk about the Bill Gross saying this is ending, that it's topping out, there's all this talk by the Fed, which a lot of the other guests I have on are laughing at them. They're saying there's no way that they can raise interest rates unless they intentionally want to crash the market. And in the pre-interview, you said, you explained it in a bit of a different way, but the same kind of take. Can the U.S. raise rates?
The history of raising interest rates is that if you keep the annual rise to about 150 basis points, traditionally the stock market can incorporate that. So can the Fed raise interest rates a small amount without trashing the stock market? Yeah. I think their bigger problem is that you raise interest rates, the dollar flies up, and it's going to be tough on corporate earnings, particularly tech and some of the areas that have been very strong. So can they do it? Yeah, but not if the economy is soft. And I think the Fed was really surprised at how soft the economy is. But let me shift things, because I don't look at things the way Bill Gross does. When you look at what's happening with debt, something very new is happening in the last 20 years that has never happened before. We have seen debt used as a control mechanism, and we've seen entrapment of nations and economic hit on nations using debt for centuries. So the game is old as the hill. But what I pointed out in Planet Debt is when you combine digital systems, payment systems, phone systems, smartphones, with artificial intelligence and relational database, and now you add the cloud, Greg, what you're talking about doing is being able to run economic hits at the individual level globally. Okay? So, and this is why the Snowden revelations were so important, because if you look at them in combination with debt, we're talking about a much more invasive entrapment system. So literally the system can reach through sovereign nations and start controlling everything from municipalities to households through, directly.
And one of the things you pointed out was they make money off of failure. We can make this fail, and we could get these assets or whatever it is at a much better price, or they can make tons of money off of failure. That's the bottom line with having everything in the cloud. You lose your job, and the next day, oops, your credit card is up. This is one of your examples, 30%. Up 30% overnight.
Right. And so
your interest rate, I should say.
Right. The reality is, in some scenarios, collapse is more attractive. What I'm worried about is perpetual entrapment. When you create a machinery where the financial system can make more money from people's failures, municipality failures, country failures, and constantly harvest places and pick up all the equity cheap by using this entrapment machine, then it never has to collapse. And in theory, it can keep going forever. At least it can. It's a military question, an intelligence question, whether it can go on forever, because it runs on force. And that's why, to a certain extent, you can't solve a political problem with a financial solution. Our problem is not the financial system. Our problem is we have a group of leaders who are running systems outside the law as we believe it to be, and certainly way outside of ethics as we would like it to be. And the question is, who are they and why, and how do we get them replaced? Because we're coming here in the United States, we're coming into a presidential election, and we're about to get 2 years of same old, same old. And something, we have real problems. We need to deal with them. And I just did an interview on the Solera Report with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was Colin Powell's former chief of staff. Absolute fantastic interview, where he basically said the same thing. He said, look, it's same old, and we have real problems. He described he's working on a commission for the Navy where, because of changes in sea levels, they're going to have to reconfigure or move all ports in the nation. Okay? So that is a very, very real problem. These guys, we're going to have another 2 years of just, howdy doody show. And we can't afford it. We've reached the point as a nation and as a planet where we have to deal with real issues and really proceed into the future. And so to me, the question is, who in the world is running things, and how do we get them changed?
And which is, really the tip of the iceberg, Baltimore or all these other places where, Al Sharpton comes in, and now there's talk of, they want to have a national police force run by the Justice Department. Oh, so more militarization, more central control.
Right.
And that's what you're talking about, that this is really, they're not fixing the problem. They're making sure their paradigm stays in place, and they'll use force to do it. Is that correct?
Well, what they're doing is they're trying to get more and more political and economic control in a way that's shrinking the pie. So they're cutting into other people's pie and stealing other people's pie instead of doing things that build the pie. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to build the pie. That's what the BRIC nations are all saying. We've got to build the pie. How do we get together and build the pie? One of the things that I never expected when I started to do the Planet Debt analysis, I never expected to end up right back in the middle of Obamacare and Common Core in education. Because what I realized is Obamacare and Common Core are sort of federal mandates in healthcare and federal mandates in education are one plan. What you're doing is you're standardizing the human beings and standardizing their treatment or education so that you can re-engineer everything into the online systems and software systems so you can privatize the whole shebang in a way that massively reduces productivity, but it creates more federal mandates to create monopolies for a few guys.
And Jeb Bush is into Common Core. Jeb Bush.
All the sort of mainstream candidates are into this stuff. And all it's doing, Greg, is creating monopolies for private corporations that are highly uneconomic and lead to very dark places. Because I have to tell you, the history of giving corporations and intelligence agencies direct access to our children without the intervention or supervision of parents and teachers and doctors, that has never turned out well in the history of the country, let alone the planet. So it's very, very dark, and it could never happen if it wasn't for this debt entrapment. Because let me tell you, the way they've gotten control of local economies and been free to re-engineer local economies is by getting everybody entrapped in debt. And the next thing you know, the young man has to go into the military because, they will relieve his student debt or they will relieve his parents' debt. He signs up. So it's an entrapment model and it's not a financial model. And the reason it might not necessarily collapse is, they want to keep everybody entrapped. They can harvest our failure and make money from it.
And then there's Greece and the failure over in Europe. And then there's the black swan, as Nassim Taleb coined the phrase, what nobody sees. And that you have this entrapment model, which is incredibly fragile. It's not robust. It's fragile.
Well, here's what's fragile. Financially, it's, I believe, because it all comes down to a military question. Remember, we ended our conversation last time, and I said, listen, this is a military question. Central banking warfare depends on what the warfare model can enforce. Here's where the black swan event comes. When we reach a tipping point of global population, whether in the United States or Europe or Asia, who realizes, we're run by people who we, as a practical matter, from our point of view, are psychopaths, and there's nothing good that can come from leaving them in power, then you're going to get a shift in consciousness. And to me, that's the wild card, because what we need are markets. Markets bring out the group genius. Market can solve essentially most of the problems we're probably facing. But for markets to work, we have to realize there's no point in going through these guys' mechanisms. They're nuts. And it can never come out well for us if we go through their vehicles.
Well, markets also include bankruptcy, and one of the things that we did not do with the big banks is bankrupt them, but we transferred the debt. And could countries go under, like Greece, the canary in the proverbial EU coal mine? Are countries going to be the ones going under for this conquest model, this entrapment model? Is that what you're talking about? Countries will go under?
What is happening, I call it the financial coup d'etat. They are re-engineering governance. So the question is, who are they and where do they want to go? And the reality, as I said, we're shifting the liabilities into the sovereign nations and we're pulling the assets out to private investors. And so you have a giant sucking sound of equity into sort of private invisible hands, and the liability stuck back into governments. They took all the retirement savings before we all wanted it back, essentially. It's what's happened in Europe and the United States. And so the question is, from a re-engineering matter, where is this going? It was very interesting. Peggy Noonan, who is one of the editorialists I read in the Wall Street Journal regularly, had had a discussion with someone to be unnamed, but supposedly very powerful and influential, who said, in some period of time, the United States may not exist as a country. It may be separated out into separate parts. I read that as a trial balloon. So, this re-engineering, when you get all the assets in private hands and you get all the liabilities in governmental hands, then you've got the national, you've got the sovereign governments who don't have information sovereignty and they don't have financial sovereignty. So then the question is, who's really running things and what do they want and what are we willing to do about it?
And this is why you said that you clearly cannot see what's going on because the information's opaque, correct?
We're behind, Glenn Greenwald called it the one-way mirror, and we're behind a one-way mirror. And if you look at all the different questions, when I sit down and look at a portfolio every morning and say, what's my strategy, where do I want to allocate money to and why, all the questions I need answered to make the right decisions, I can't get access to. So, for example, the value of the U.S. dollar, the problem that the U.S. dollar has, it's been on a long-term slope down. It's come up recently, but if you look at the long-term line since the 80s, it's down. And one of the reasons is the every year, the dependency of the dollar on the U.S. military to create its value rises. So if you look at the institutional credibility, the last poll I looked at showed the single most respected institution in the United States right now is the military. They're at 50%. Supreme Court's at 23%. Congress is below 10%. So institution credibility is in the sort of basement except for the military, and that's because the military is driving the value. But here's the question. How long can that last? What's really behind that? Because that's very opaque. It's behind the one-way mirror.
How long can that last without a major war? And that must be, and you've hinted at this, but that's what we're talking about here. How long can they keep this going before they are forced to have a major war? Because what we're talking about is one world government, consolidation of power in very few hands, and when do they pull the trigger on war? Are you worried about that?
Yes. But in the race to the one world currency and one world government, the United States is just a faction. It's not the whole game. Look at what's happening with Snowden and Putin and the BRICS. What that says to me is Mr. Global, whoever Mr. Global is, wasn't willing to bet the ranch on the United States and wanted a plan B. It's the Hegelian dialectic. You need a little competition. The U.S. wasn't going fast enough. We were getting bogged in the mud, so you create another team and, you get the competition going and get everybody excited again.
A lot of people think that this thing's going to crash this fall. I mean, I had Jonathan Kahn on from the biblical standpoint, with the Eel 29 and, the super Shemitah, that's one aspect. But other people that I have analysts on, good people, who think that, this is going to be a major dislocation coming up, this fall. Now, Bill Gross didn't exactly say that, but when he says this is going to end, he's not talking about 5 years from now. But a lot of people are thinking this is going to be a big turning point year, one way or another. What say you?
I think this fall is going to be a major turning point. I think you see the SDR system coming to a head. You see the U.S. budget is going to be a very interesting debate. You see the push to get the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the EU deal done. You have a lot of institutional relationships that needed to be restructured over the last couple of years. They haven't been. The can has been kicked. Those changes, whether the IMF or U.S. domestic or Europe with Greece, they're all coming to a head. And so we're going to get some big shifts. And if you're managing a big bond fund, you've got a problem because you've got major amounts of position. And for the last 3 years, the dealers have pulled their staffing and inventory and capital from the market. So you don't have a lot of market makers the way you did 3 or 5 years ago. So there's going to be a turn in the bond market and or a plateau, and that's going to be uncomfortable for those guys. And we're going to see some messy times, I think.
When you say messy, describe messy.
Well, you have to have been sitting on a trading floor. I was sitting on a trading floor. I had a deal coming to market, which is about $300 million, which in those days was a big deal. And I was doing a refunding, and I depended on Treasury slugs for escrowing the refunding, and I'm right in the middle of the deal. We've sold, but we haven't closed, and Treasury shuts the slug window, and I can't get the securities. And that was messy.
So your deal goes poof.
No, actually, no, I got it closed, but it was, it was certainly very a messy process and required, literally board meetings of the partners. So all I'm saying is people get hiccup, they hiccup the next guy, everybody gets scared and panicked. In many ways, the financial system, despite its fragility, has a lot of resilience and a lot of brains and a lot of talent. We can deal with a lot of mess, but there's going to be pain.
I want to come back to the dollar, and I want to come down to the street level because everybody uses dollars around the world, especially here in the U.S. That's our currency. But Christine Lagarde is worried about all these loans being denominated in dollars. And you said in the pre-interview that if you can print money, you got no problem. Not that big of a deal. That's just your currency devaluation. But if you're not printing dollars, you got to earn those dollars, as you said. And so Christine Lagarde has been openly worried about the BRICS countries, about countries have dollar-denominated loans. Might there be a move to head the dollar panic off at the pass and change the dollar and revalue it into the SDR system? Just boom. You know what? You're going to have to take a 30% hit, USA. Sorry, we're not going to denominate loans in dollars anymore. Could that happen?
Well, but here's the thing. The problem comes with the outstanding. So could the SDR system evolve things? Yes. But if you look at where we sit, if the U.S. wants to jerk the chain, and I'm not saying they will because they could shoot themselves in the foot or the head, but if the U.S. wants to jerk the chain, all of those dollar loans are outstanding, and they could put a lot of people over the barrel, which is why you see the BRICS making all the swap deals and other deals so that if that should happen and that time should come, they will still have liquidity.
In other words, we can't raise interest rates and we can't call in loans because if we did, the dollar would skyrocket and foreign national companies would go bankrupt and bad things would happen. Somebody said one time, I can't remember who said this quote, but when things don't move, it's lovely. But when things move, that's where you have problems. Things that you didn't think could move, and when they move, you have problems. You're talking about a move in interest rates or move in the value of the dollar or that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, but I think that's not the most dangerous move.
What is the most dangerous move?
Here's the most dangerous move. The most dangerous move is, when the Soviet Union lost the war, the United States had the opportunity to step up and sort of lead a new reinforced global Bretton Woods system or a global something. But they had the ability to exercise global leadership, and they didn't. Instead, they went on a global sweepstakes, pig fest. And what we got is, we got very immature leadership globally. We got the neocons, we got a mess in Iraq, we got on and on and on. And now I think, the Anglo-American alliance is in real danger of killing the goose that laid the golden egg. Because I think you look both domestically and globally, we all feel the same way. People who have to get up every morning and do something productive to earn their living are looking at this leadership and saying, something, I don't want them. I've had it. And it's, the story of the scorpion and the frog.
Oh, yes, because, okay. Let me get on your back, the scorpion, and the scorpion halfway across the water says, bites him. He says, what happened? He says, I'm a scorpion. What can you say?
Right. So my fear is that literally domestically and globally, we get a consciousness that says, these people are scorpions. We've had it. I think part of the Russian reaction is it's not an economic issue. It's not even an issue of wanting to have national sovereignty. It is a repulsion against something which is so perverted and unhealthy and inhuman that they want nothing to do with it. It is a very deep choice of values and culture, and I'm seeing that accelerate domestically and globally. So,
and go ahead.
When the leaders in a financial market lose the mandate of heaven, Greg, you get something far worse than a collapse.
And war depends on how bad the one side wants it, which is the Anglo side. Well, that's the war card. It depends on how bad they want to repulse it, and of course, then that's the war card, which is what we have here. That looks like it's going to rear its ugly head at some point, because unless somebody backs down, the war card is going to get played. Am I right?
Well, here's something. I think we may even be coming into a world where there's no amount of war that can work, if you can imagine that. In other words, you can't keep a complex global financial system going with force alone. It just doesn't work.
Isn't that another catch-22? If they have war, then, all these derivatives, which are the Bank of International Settlements, the official number is a quadrillion. The official, some people say it's 2.5 times that, but way bigger. And so
Right.
if we do have a war, I mean, isn't that another shoot yourself in the head moment where let's have war, boom, the whole thing collapses. So we're in a kind of a funny situation.
Absolutely. So all the tricks we've been using may be running up against their useful life, is what I'm saying.
We either have collapse or war is what I'm coming down to. I mean, I've been doing this now since 2009, and I'm trying to feel my way through the dark. I have all kinds of people on. I don't know what the answer is. I have smart people on. When you see me on the screen, I guarantee you the person on the other side is smarter than me.
There's something else, and that is there's change. It doesn't have to get to World War III, and it doesn't have to get to collapse, but it does have to get to change. And change is where, and it's very granular because it's coming on a decentralized basis. So, in every walk of life, in every sector, in every industry, in every government, people start saying, we need to attend to the real problems before us, and we need to stop the stupid stuff. And they literally walk away. It could happen.
So you're saying there's three options.
Right.
War, collapse, or change.
Change. Right.
One of those three things is going to happen.
Right. This is a Curtis Mayfield thing. We just need to change. He had a song called New World Order. He said, we just need to change. Right.
Catherine Austin Fitts, her latest report, Planet Debt. We just skimmed the surface, folks. You'll have to go on and become a member of the SolarReport.com. Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you for a very insightful interview. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you, Greg. You're great. It's always a pleasure.